The chair is authorized to declare recesses at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Mr. Attorney General, we'd like to welcome you to the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Subcommittee today to testify regarding the Department of Justice's fiscal 2024 budget request. Your budget requests a total of roughly $40 billion in discretionary resources for the Department of Justice, an increase of over $2 billion over the fiscal year 2023 enacted level. The department's budget submission outlines positive themes such as upholding the rule of law, keeping our country safe, and administering just courts and correctional systems. However, I'm concerned that these themes simply give lip service to the American people, while the details outlined in your budget fail to adequately address these concerns. The American people continue to be concerned with the skyrocketing opioid epidemic, killing 107,000 Americans last year. Synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl, mainly fentanyl, remain the primary driver of the increase in overdose deaths. A lot of people don't realize that actual deaths from regular opioids is going down, and that the increase in overdose deaths is due solely to fentanyl. In your own budget submission, you note data from the Centers for Disease Control, the National Center for Health Statistics, which indicate an estimated 107,000 Americans needlessly died of drug overdoses during 2021, an increase of nearly 15% from the year before. With that backdrop, we received your budget, which doesn't seem to convey the appropriate sense of urgency. The Drug Enforcement Agency's budget request, for example, requests only 4 additional agents for fiscal year 2024. Additionally, the department's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force budget, whose mission is to reduce the supply of illegal drugs in the U.S., would actually see a reduction of $25 million and the loss of approximately 70 agents. In spite of the fury of this epidemic that we're in, you're cutting back. Don't understand. We don't have to look far, though, to see where your department's true priorities appear to lie. As the DEA and the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Forces receive little or even less funding, your budget submission requests nearly $45 million across components for zero-emission vehicles to meet President Biden's executive order requiring vehicle fleet electrification. A similar theme can be observed when it comes to your department's efforts to meaningfully combat violent crime across the country. As you note in your budget submission, the United States has experienced a dramatic increase in violent crime incidents, with the number of violent crimes increasing by 29% in 2021. 29% increase in a year. While our federal law enforcement officers have the enormous responsibility of arresting violent criminals, the department also has the responsibility to hold these criminals accountable. Unfortunately, recent actions from the department appear to be sending the wrong message. Our job is to ensure the department's budget is carried out efficiently, effectively, and to the benefit of the American people. I strongly believe that supporting law enforcement and efforts to combat the opioid epidemic should be a top priority for this subcommittee, and it will be. Attorney General Garland, we recognize that you have an incredibly demanding job, and I appreciate you being here today. I hope your testimony will reveal well-reasoned approaches to the many difficult criminal justice issues that affect our local communities. We will endeavor to be respectful of our witnesses' time, and we'll follow up with you should we have any additional questions. So at this time, let me recognize Mr. Cartwright for any remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and I join you in welcoming our witness, Attorney General Merrick Garland. Attorney General Garland, welcome back to our subcommittee, and we look forward to your testimony regarding the President's budget request regarding fiscal year 2024 for the Justice Department. Last year, we made critical investments and down payments in your department, and I look forward to hearing from you about how the resources we provided will support the important work across the Justice Department, as well as how these investments are making our communities safer in this country. The mission of the Justice Department is vast and broad. There is no shortage of topics I know we will discuss here today: enforcing and upholding the rule of law, supporting state, local, tribal law enforcement, combating drug trafficking networks to keep dangerous narcotics out of our communities, defense of our national security, and mitigation of emerging foreign and domestic threats, including cyber threats. I know we'll also hear of the critical tasks the department is carrying out, including preservation of civil liberties and support for free and fair elections, protection of vulnerable populations exposed to domestic and community violence, safeguarding our commerce and our economy. DOJ also administers a massive, complex detention and correction enterprise. It occupies a big part of its budget. DOJ adjudicates immigration benefits and oversees a broad and sophisticated criminal investigative and prosecutorial system. To carry out the department's broad missions I just mentioned, your FY 2024 budget request seeks $39.7 billion in discretionary funding, about 6% above the previous enacted level. While I know there are voices making noise about reducing funding levels across the non-defense agencies like DOJ, I don't think Congress can ignore some of the challenges we are facing in our communities back home. And I echo the concern of the chairman about the record number of deaths due to the opioid epidemic, as well as increases in crime and gun violence. Congress needs to continue to build on those investments we made last year to the COPS hiring program and increases to our federal law enforcement to provide them the necessary tools to face these existing and emerging challenges. Further, we need to sustain critical grant programs such as those under the Office on Violence Against Women to address the so-called shadow pandemic of domestic and partner violence, which did surge globally during the COVID-19 pandemic. Congress authorized new programs under the 2023 Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, and I look forward to seeing the continuation of those programs in FY 2024. Attorney General Garland, you have a big job that is only getting bigger all the time. So once again, welcome, and I look forward to your testimony and working with you on how we can best invest in fiscal year 2024. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Attorney General, you're recognized for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered into the record. I would ask that you try to keep your statement to 5 minutes. so that we can have additional time for questions. You're now recognized. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Cartwright, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Justice Department's funding request for fiscal year 2024. Every day, the Justice Department works to keep our country safe from all threats, foreign and domestic. We work to protect the civil rights of everyone in our country, and every day in everything we do, we work to uphold the rule of law that is the foundation of our system of government. The Justice Department's budget request seeks the resources we need to continue and expand our work. To help keep our country safe, we are requesting more than $21.3 billion to sustain and expand the capacities of the FBI, DEA, ATF, and United States Marshal Service, as well as the offices of the United States Attorneys. These resources will help protect communities across the country. They will strengthen our efforts to counter the threats posed by hostile nation states, specifically the People's Republic of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They will give us the resources we need to counter foreign and domestic terrorism, and they will sustain and expand our whole-of-government approach to combating violent crime, the epidemic of gun violence, and the scourge of drug trafficking. The department is also seeking $2.7 billion for our Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, the COPS Office, hiring program. This funding will enable us to help our state and local law enforcement agency partners to hire more full-time law enforcement professionals. As part of our efforts to disrupt drug trafficking, our budget requests $3.3 billion for DEA's investigations, diversion control, and counter-drug efforts across 241 domestic offices and 92 foreign offices in 69 countries around the world. The department is focused on getting deadly fentanyl out of our communities and combating the violent cartels that are putting it there. Just last week, DEA issued an alert warning about the emerging threat posed by the deadly combination of fentanyl and xylazine, which increases the risk of fatal drug poisoning. We also know that addressing the proliferation of deadly drugs requires more than just enforcement actions. So we are requesting more than $646 million for grants to help address the drug overdose epidemic and the public health challenges of addiction and drug use. The department's budget also requests significant investments in our efforts to combat economic crimes, protect the health, safety, and financial security of American consumers, and safeguard competition. This includes $770 million for our U.S. Attorney's offices to pursue investigations and prosecutions of complex economic crimes. And these include COVID-19 related fraud schemes that have targeted individuals and exploited the pandemic and stolen taxpayer dollars. Protecting civil rights was a founding purpose of the department in 1870, and it remains our urgent charge today. The department's budget requests significant investments to advance that work. This includes our efforts to protect voting rights, to combat hate crimes, to foster trust and accountability in law enforcement, to defend federally protected reproductive rights, and to advance environmental justice and tackle the climate crisis. Specifically, we are requesting a total of $251.6 million for the Civil Rights Division to carry out its important mission. We are also requesting $127.6 million to support the FBI's investigations of civil rights violations. Administering just immigration courts and correctional systems is another important area of departmental focus for which we are requesting additional resources. We are requesting $1.46 billion, a 69.2% increase for the Executive Office for Immigration Review to hire nearly 1,000 new staff. This includes 150 new immigration judge teams. These resources will support our efforts to apply the immigration laws justly and efficiently. We are also seeking $8.82 billion in funding for the Bureau of Prisons. These resources will help ensure the health, safety, and well-being of correctional staff and incarcerated individuals. They will help ensure transparency, accountability, and effective oversight of all federal prison and of detention centers. And they will enable the department to fully implement the provisions of the First Step Act and increase programming to prepare individuals in federal prisons for successful reentry. I'm extremely proud of the work the department's employees are doing to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. I respectfully ask for your support for the President's FY 2024 funding requests so that we may continue and build upon that work. Thank you very much.
Under the 5-minute rule, with questions for the witness, I'll begin by recognizing myself. Synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl, remain the primary driver of the increase in overdose deaths. In my home state of Kentucky, for example, more than 2,200 people died from drug overdoses in 2021. Nationwide, more than 107,000 lost their lives, increasing every day and every year. The department's budget submission has listed combating drug trafficking and preventing overdose deaths as a top priority. With that in mind, how can the department claim to be prioritizing the war on drugs when your budget submission for fiscal 24 only requests 4 additional DEA agents? The nation's primary drug-fighting organization, DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, with thousands of employees. In the face of this overwhelming epidemic that we're up against with fentanyl, a poison, you only ask for 4 additional agents and a reduction in program funding for the organized crime and drug enforcement task forces. Our cities are afire with violence and illegality, flooded with killer drugs, and you not only don't ask for more help for DEA agents, but you're actually promoting a reduction in funding for the organized crime and drug enforcement task forces. That I can't fathom. If we were to approve your budget submission as is, the organized crime and drug enforcement task forces would lose $25 million in funding and 70 task force agents. And instead, the department would gain nearly $45 million for zero-emission electric vehicles, cars. Does that sound like the budget request for a department that's prioritizing the war on drugs? I don't think so. Today, the DEA has identified Mexican drug cartels as largely responsible for the production of U.S. consumed fentanyl using China-sourced primary precursor chemicals. How is the department addressing and prioritizing the China-Mexico cartel's U.S. drug trafficking pathway, General?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I am a former narcotics and violent crime prosecutor. I am very well aware of this problem. The very first thing I did when I came into the Justice Department was to create a violent crime strategy because of the enormous increase we saw in 2020. And therefore, and I have met personally with the families of the victims of the fentanyl crisis. So I'm personally charged with this problem. We are seeking an increase of $342.8 million, a 3.4% increase across Justice Department to counter drug trafficking, a total of $10.4 billion. Now, the budget math and the actual math doesn't always match up. So the actual number of agents that we are requesting are 131, not 4. The reason for the difference in the numbers is that FY23 budget, which only became effective recently, had 127. We're adding an additional 4, and the funding for FY24 will fund the in total number into FY24. In addition, we're seeking 50 diversion investigators and 35 analysts. So the actual total of drug fighting positions we're asking to add to the DEA is 216. OCDF, we're not cutting. We're keeping the same amount in OCDF, $550.5 million. I also want to make clear that with respect to violent crime overall, we are asking for a $1.4 billion increase over last year. This includes increases for the U.S. Attorney's offices, for the DEA, for ATF, FBI, and the Marshal Service, and also particularly important, the way we believe we need to fight both the drug problem and the violent crime problem is in partnership with our state and local partners. So we're asking for a $3.7 billion increase in the grants that we can give for cops hiring, for the Burn JAG, for the new gun crime prevention initiative, so that we can effectively partner in task forces with our state and local partners who are the boots on the ground in the war against both narcotics and violent crime. I want to be clear, this is an extraordinarily high priority for the Justice Department.
What are we doing to intercept or prevent the shipment of the precursor chemicals from China, exclusively from China, through the cartels in Mexico and into the U.S.? What are we doing to curtail the Chinese from forwarding this stuff here?
Mr. Chairman, you put your finger on an enormous problem, which is exactly what you said. The Chinese precursor companies are going into Mexico, being made into fentanyl, either powder or pills there. So we're attacking this in several ways. First of all, I've personally gone to Mexico twice to meet with the President of Mexico and with the Attorney General and with the security ministers there. I've met with them all again in the United States several times, trying to press them to cut off these precursors. Together with the Treasury Department, our government has sanctioned some of the precursor companies that we can find in Mexico. We will, as we did with respect to the the Russian oligarchs in Ukraine, we will seize and freeze and forfeit their materials when we find them. So we are doing an enormous amount, I think, to try to cut off this flow, which you are correct in describing as being the ultimate source of our problem.
Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, as I mentioned in my opening statement, there are voices on Capitol Hill calling for capping fiscal year 2024 spending levels at the fiscal year 2022 level, essentially a 22% cut below the enacted level last year. We sent a letter to your department asking for what that would mean for what you're up to in the department, and we got a letter dated March 18 back from your department, which I would ask unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record, Mr. Chairman. And you responded, and I want to say I'm concerned by some of the impacts highlighted in the letter, picking up on the train of thought Chairman Rogers was working on. I'm looking at cuts to the comprehensive opioid stimulant and substance use program would see a reduction of $40.7 million. The drug treatment courts would see a reduction of $19.4 million. The victims, let's see. In fact, 22% reduction overall would mean a lot of things, starting with the war on opioids, but extending to so many other things. And I want to ask, what are some of your biggest concerns as relates to 22% cut in what you got last year?
Well, to start off with the questions that the chairman asked me, it would be devastating for our efforts to combat drug trafficking. Totally devastating. It would lead to a $620 million reduction in base resources for the DEA. It would lead to a 28% reduction of the workforces in a single year of the U.S. Attorney's offices. These are the offices that bring the drug prosecutions and the violent crime prosecutions. It would lead to a loss of 11,000 positions at the FBI. At the Marshal Service, it would lead to our inability to replace 221 U.S. deputy U.S. Marshals who are responsible, in addition to judicial protection, to fugitive task forces to find the people who we have arrest warrants on. And it would lead to enormous cuts in our COPS office and in our burn JAG grants. The consequence would be truly devastating to our efforts to fight violent crime and to our efforts to fight the drug traffickers.
Well, you mentioned COPS hiring program and the burn justice assistance grants. If those get cut by 22%, who gets hurt, Attorney General?
Well, those people who are hurt are the state and local. Well, there's a direct and indirect. The direct effect is we're not able to give the money to the state and local police departments. The ultimate effect is the communities that are plagued by fentanyl, the communities that are plagued by violent crime, because this money goes to state and local law enforcement for their own work against violent crime and drug trafficking, and to their work with us in task forces to attack both of those.
Sure, the COPS hiring program is federal assistance so that local municipalities that are strapped for cash to begin with right now can take federal money and use that toward the hiring of additional police officers. Is that correct?
That's right.
Well, if we were to absorb a cut of 22% to that program, how long would it take those local municipalities to recover from such a cut?
And we're estimating 300 to 400 fewer law enforcement funded positions as a consequence of a reduction of 50 million just in the COP hiring program. In the burn JAG, the awards to local governments would be reduced by an average of 30,000. State awards $1 million per state. I can't estimate how long it would take for them to recover from that, but they may never be able to recover from that. That requires state funding to make up for that. And whether the states are capable of providing that funds, I don't know. I assume that they're not, otherwise they wouldn't be relying on federal funds.
Well, you know, the chairman mentioned an increase in crime in this country over the last year. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the end of the pandemic and people being out and about more. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. If there's an increase in crime, no matter what the reason, we need to fight it. And the question is our ability to fight crime going to be increased or decreased if we have a decrease of 22% in your budget?
We drastically decreased.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm listened with interest to the comments of the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I'm glad that he got a response, the minority got a response to their letter. I also sit on Judiciary, and my chairman, Mr. Jordan, has asked me to ask you about a letter he sent back in January asking you to appear before his committee. He has not gotten a response to that letter. And so I'd ask you, can I get a commitment from you to respond to him in the immediate future with several dates that would be, during which you would be available to appear before the Judiciary Committee?
Of course I'm going to appear before the House Judiciary Committee. I understand there are discussions about scheduling that have been going on. I don't think there's any problem in that respect.
There's been no response to the letter, so I think there's some question about whether you would be willing to appear. So getting your commitment to appear is helpful, and I thank you
willing,
for that.
more than willing.
I listened with interest to your statement, and I found it quite incredulous that you would talk about the rule of law when your department and so many in your department have done so much to undermine the rule of law. I want to ask, internal communications showed that the DOJ and the National School Boards Association extensively colluded prior to your memorandum back on October 4th of 2021, which inserted federal law enforcement into local school board meetings. In fact, you previously testified to the House Judiciary Committee that the sole basis for your memorandum was the NSBA letter sent to President Biden back on September 29th, 2021, only 5 days earlier. Is that correct?
It's not correct that that was the sole basis, and that wasn't my testimony. My testimony was that it was an important basis in addition to seeing many, many, many reports in the news of threats of violence and violence in the preceding period.
On October 20th, 2021, the FBI's Counterterrorism and Criminal Divisions operationalized your directive, announcing to all FBI special agents in charge the creation of a new threat tag, Edu Officials, to track school board-related threats. Is that correct?
So this is an internal FBI operational working. I didn't know about it at the time. I've seen it now. All it is, from what I've read of the FBI's own testimony, is that when a particular kind of person is, when there's a threat against a particular kind of person, there's a particular kind of tag put on the information. So if it's a threat against an education official, it's put on education. If it's a threat against a Supreme Court justice, it's SCOTUS, S-C-O-T-U-S. The tags don't mean anything other than a way to track how many threats of this kind are aimed at particular kinds of people, so the FBI can figure out whether this is a serious problem or not a serious problem.
Do you know how many citizens were tagged with this threat?
I don't know. I think the FBI returned that there were, in their own subpoena response to Mr. Jordan, I think there were around 20 as to whom what are called guardians were attached to for further investigation. Yeah.
22 to be exact, and 6 were actually investigated by the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI. Citizens of this country who were trying to make their voices heard at their school board meetings and instead were tagged by the FBI as terrorists by agents of this government seeking to silence their voices. When it was discovered eventually that this was not the national threat that the Biden administration or the School Boards Association wanted it to be, why didn't you withdraw the memo?
So let me be clear about the memo. The memo was aimed at violence and threats of violence. It was not aimed at parents protesting to their school boards. In fact, it was very clear in the second sentence that that is constitutionally protected. The thing that is not constitutionally protected are threats of violence and violence. The memo was not aimed at parents in any respect. It was aimed at violence and threats of violence against school administrators and teachers.
And yet, after it was determined that this was not a national threat, you refused to withdraw the memo, and the agents of the FBI continued to act as if your memo were still in force and still in effect. So, would you agree that you just continued to put forward this false rhetoric to your agents that was not corrected and resulted in the investigation of hardworking American citizens just wanting to have their voices heard at the ridiculous indoctrination going on in their school boards?
The investigations were not aimed at hardworking individuals who were just trying to protest about
the documents you provided show that they were the opening of 6 investigations in your counterterrorism division.
My understanding is that there were no full field investigations opened at all, that all of them were in the end referred to state and local.
Exactly, where they should have been in the first place. It's clearly a state and local issue, should never have started, and I yield back.
Ms. Morelli?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Attorney General, for being here. As we've been discussing today, the Department of Justice's ability to achieve its public safety mission will be severely hampered by reducing funding to fiscal year 22 enacted levels. A number of my colleagues have pointed out the impact on various aspects of the department. I wanted to just focus, if I can, for a moment on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in particular. ATF plays a key role in addressing gun violence crisis in our nation. It's the only federal agency that I'm aware that ensures gun dealers and manufacturers are following federal law and is uniquely positioned to investigate and prevent firearms trafficking. However, for years, ATF has been starved of resources and understaffed. Although its goal is to inspect each license holder once every 5 years, a recent report indicated the ATF only inspects around 7% of federal firearm license each year, making it virtually impossible to ensure dealers are maintaining compliance with even the most basic requirements. Can you just comment, sir, on the effect that cuts to the agency would have on its ability to properly inspect gun dealers?
Well, the ATF has two obligations. One is directly fighting violent crime through their work in tracing of stolen guns at crime scenes, ballistics with respect to crime scenes, participating in the anti-trafficking task forces. And then the other side of their obligations are the ones that you've also described with respect to inspecting gun dealers, to ensure that the rules that Congress has passed about who's prohibited from holding a gun, former felons, for example, are enforced. And the consequence of the cuts to the ATF would be extraordinary. A loss of 190 agents, which would include 130 industry operation investigators and 180 tech support staff. That would eliminate all state and local training that ATF does at the National Center for Explosives Training. It will increase the amount of time necessary to trace a gun found at a crime scene by more than 2 months. But by eliminating the 130 industry operations investigators that you're talking about, it would make it completely impossible to make the kinds of inspections every 5 years that you were asking.
Would you support increased funding to ensure that ATF has the resources to both train and hire enough staff to oversee the industry?
Yes, and that is included within our, I'm trying to find the exact amount that we've asked for in addition for the ATF. The request we've asked for, so this comes under the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and so we've asked for, which was passed last year. So we've asked for an increase of $71.1 million, which would include funding for these purposes.
I want to just stay on the same subject just for the moment. The National Tracing Center of ATF establishes chain of custody of firearms recovered in crimes, providing against investigative leads, federal, state, and local agencies as they work to solve firearms crimes and collect intelligence about trafficking, as I understand it. Can you discuss the impact that proposed cuts to the agency would have on the time it takes to trace guns at the center?
I don't know the exact amount of time that it would take, but obviously with that many fewer people available to do the tracing at the center, it would take enormously, a longer amount of time. I think the specific thing that I cited was 2 months for tracing. So I'm not sure whether that answers the question that you're asking, but I think this is exactly the question that you were asking. It would increase by 2 months the amount of time at the National Tracing Center.
Very good, which would obviously severely hamper investigations.
Yes.
I want to just, with the remaining few seconds I have, I represent Rochester, New York, in the midst of devastating cycle of gun violence. The number of homicides in 2021 was a record high of 84 last year, nearly the same amount. And I've asked for the department to prioritize firearm prosecutions and organize enhanced collaborations between state and local partners. In May of 21, the department announced the comprehensive strategy for reducing violent crime, initiatives like the Standing Violent Crime Reduction Steering Committee, directing U.S. attorneys to develop comprehensive strategies. Can you just provide an update on the strategy and resources that are needed to further your efforts?
Yeah, so what you're referring to particularly is the memo that I issued soon after I came into the department. I'm happy to talk generally about our strategy. I'll point out for your purposes for Rochester. Rochester is now, was announced last July, will be one of the grant recipients for the Project Safe Neighborhoods program. And also at the same time, it'll be one of the new sites for the National Public Safety Partnerships.
Thank you so. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if you can comment further. I don't want to. I wanted to yield back because I see the balance of my time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Morelli. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General, for being here today. I want to just talk real quick about patriotism. It's something that has driven me personally. Patriotism compels us to love our country, right? It compels us to want security for our country. It wants us to, as a nation, be dominant on the global stage and with peace and tranquility within our borders. Patriotism, however, it doesn't require us to trust our government. That is earned, and that is only earned after a track record of performance and citizens actually witnessing their government working for them, not for themselves. And I think of all agencies right now, the Department of Justice that you head has got a brand name problem, has a trust issue with the American people. There's several encroachments over the last few years, the weaponization of the Justice Department, FISA issues that go back several years. And for me personally, when I'm in meetings like this and I hear the Attorney General for the Department of Justice qualify justice with terms like environmental justice, social justice, climate justice, racial justice, whether it's in the written testimony or verbal, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because anytime you put a word in front of the word justice, you're diluting justice. And you're actually putting a finger inadvertently on the scales of justice, and it changes the paradigm of our country from one that is guaranteeing equality to one that starts searching for equity. And in the Constitution, equality is guaranteed, not equity. So I want to start there, because I think that's very important to understand that you do have a brand name issue right now and a trust issue with the American people. And it's going to come to a head in the form of this FISA conversation that's going to be happening here in the near term. No mention of it here today in your oral testimony, nothing as far as I can see in the written testimony. But as you know, FISA is coming to expire before the end of this year, if I'm not mistaken. And right now, I don't believe that the majority of Congress, and it may be a very slim percentage of Congress that actually supports a renewal of FISA. And I sit on the Intel Committee. I understand why we have FISA, what we use it for, what value it brings to our nation's security. And I still don't trust the Department of Justice, the FBI, and other federal agencies to use FISA in accordance with what it is intended for, and that is to keep Americans safe and not to be used against Americans who are not a threat to the country. So I'd like you to comment on that. I also want to make a quick comment on the fentanyl discussion, because that's been the front and center focus of this so far. I appreciate you going to Mexico. I appreciate you attempting to put sanctions on the Mexican companies that are partaking in the precursor development. But until we, the collective we, Congress, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Commerce, Justice, President, put a finger in the chest of China and go after the companies in China that are developing the precursor materials there before they get on a slow boat to Mexico and across our borders. 300 people will die of fentanyl today, and I would submit that the crisis at our southern border is by far the #1 national security crisis that we have. Its origins are in China. The route is through Mexico and across our border. It's fully characterized. We all know that. And 300 people today will die because we are doing nothing about it. It's you, it's the DEA. Everything we have done has failed. Okay, so we need this administration to recognize that the fentanyl crisis, not climate change, is the closest alligator to the canoe killing Americans right now. But I would love for you to talk to us about FISA and how you're going to reinstill confidence from Americans in the Department of Justice so that we can have all the tools available to you so you can actually ensure this country's security and do what's right in accordance with the Constitution.
So you've given me a lot to unpack here. Let's begin with where you started, with patriotism. I have devoted virtually my entire public life, my entire life as an adult, to public service. I have done it on the streets of Washington, D.C., facing drug traffickers, including murderers. I have done it in the Justice Department, facing across the table someone who'd killed more than 160 people in a bombing. I've done it repeatedly in that respect, and I spent almost 25 years ensuring the rule of law as a judge.
And I want to be clear, I'm not questioning your patriotism, sir. I respect your service. I appreciate your service. What I'm trying to impart is that patriots are not compelled to trust their government.
Absolutely
and
not.
The citizens that we work for want us to earn that trust from them.
I completely agree with that. And that's why I gave up the bench to come to the Justice Department, try to reinstill trust in the Justice Department and in our government. It's why I've reinstilled the norms of the department of treating like cases alike, of keeping partisanship out of the department, of ensuring that partisanship and improper influences don't affect our criminal investigations. That's all part of what I've been trying to do, and that's the whole reason I gave up a life tenure. Now let me focus on 702. 702 First time I was in the Justice Department, we had plain FISA. I'm just going to call it plain FISA. We did not have 702. That was passed by the Congress after 9/11 while I was in the court. When I came, I didn't know what 702 exactly did. I've now found every morning at my all threats briefing provided by the FBI and the Intelligence Committee that an extraordinarily large percentage of the intelligence we get comes from 702. This is what we need in order to fight the Chinese, particularly. We're getting information about their cyber attacks, about their efforts to exfiltrate information, about their efforts to export our military information, our computer science, our advanced technologies, about their efforts to control dissidents who have fled China and are in the United States. That's just one small sliver of it, but since you're particularly asking about China, the consequences of removing 702 is not going to punish the Justice Department. It's going to punish the American people in the most direct way possible. That includes the threats we get from Iran, the threats we get from Russia, the threats we get from North Korea. But I totally agree with you. We need the trust of the American people on this. And that is why one of the first things I did when I came into the Justice Department and received one of the so-called 702 reports about the non-compliance incidents, I'm sure that you're very familiar with those, was to issue a memorandum to the FBI saying that these had to be fixed, that we had to put into place new methods to ensure that they didn't occur. I've asked the Deputy Attorney General to task management of this, and she has done that. The FBI has put up an internal office of audit for the purpose of ensuring this. We've changed the way in which the FBI software for querying 702 occurs, and we have really a fantastic independent set of auditors in our National Security Division. The consequence of just these changes have been an almost 90% reduction in queries of Americans. But I desperately want FISA to be continued, not because I care about it for myself, but because I care about it for the American people. And we want to work with you and with the members of Congress to work out a way in which FISA 702 can continue. So I think I'm in complete agreement. Patriotism and the need for trust and the need for FISA and the need to be sure that people, the American people, can trust that 702 is done properly.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Ruppersberger.
Thank you. First thing, thank you for being here. This discussion, I think, is very important. I, too, was an investigative prosecutor with wiretaps. The majority of what we dealt with there, other than some murder and all, was drugs, and it's never going to stop. Even with the cartels right now, they were nasty. They were killers, and they do bad things to people. But they're even more sophisticated and have probably more money than we do now. Now, what I want to talk about, and I want to talk about a little bit, just a comment to Mr. Garcia. I know your background. I respect your background. You've raised some very good issues here. I would just hope that those of us on both sides of the aisle, when it comes to crime, that we really focus on what we need to do. Any good investigative prosecutor will tell you we need FISA. But we have to have these checks and balances, and that's what we do in Congress when you move from one role to another role. So I would call out, and I've worked with many people here, and Chairman, we've worked a lot together on international issues and this issue. My one focus that I've done a lot in my experience on the Intelligence Committee and those type of things is cybersecurity. It's a very, very serious issue. We have to deal with it. We have to be very sophisticated. China, we in 2004, we didn't realize it, but China was stealing most of our information. Thank goodness we turned it around, got with NSA, and those things are working better right now. My question, can you explain to us what going backwards? And this just drives me crazy. How can we, with all the issues that are out there, the drug issues, the international issues, how can we talk about cutting this budget to the percentage what it is? I can't think that anybody, especially who've worked in law enforcement, could let that happen where we are, and it's going to get worse. And China is ahead of us right now in a lot of areas. So we better wake up and hopefully come together on some bipartisan issues, and stand up for FBI, stand up. Unfortunately, DEA doesn't have any people. DEA has never been funded properly. So one of the things you had more funding, and when FBI did get into the narcotics, the one thing we had to talk them into, they couldn't wear wingtip shoes anymore when they were investigating. But when they got in, it really increased, and then the DEA would go into the tough areas and a lot of the undercover. What do you think we need to do to working FBI and DEA to make sure that we somehow get the resources to move forward? And I want to know what impact, because this is an important message to get out to the American public. This kind of cut will do. And we can talk about issues which is important, education and other things, but we're focused on this right now. What would be the impact for these cuts that we're talking about on the things that we've talked about? Contract murder. We're talking about cybersecurity, these things. You've had a lot of experience, and if you could, in a very stern way, let us know how serious this is.
Well, let me take the easier question first, which is FBI and DEA. The last time I was at the Justice Department, I spent most of my time trying to iron out turf wars between FBI and DEA and elbowing each other. When I came in this time, I was really very happy to see that the two agencies work together extremely well. FBI does do some drug task forces. DEA is obviously the principal agency doing that, but they've worked out memorandums of understanding so that their investigations are deconflicted, and most of these investigations are now done on joint task forces. So I'm extremely pleased with the way in which DEA and FBI
And I
work.
agree with you. I think it's strike force is the best way, federal, state, and local, to move forward in this realm.
And on the question of the effects of the cuts, I'll say really what I said before, which is neither the DEA nor the FBI can really survive with the kind of cut. Well, they can survive, but they're violent crime and drug trafficking missions can't really survive if there were a 22% cut across the board in those.
Those of us who agree with your point of view, we need to work with you and to get the message out how serious this could be to our safety, to what could happen to the United States, especially as it's focused on China, but it's everywhere, as you know. I'll yield back.
Mr. Clyde.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, for holding this hearing, and for Attorney General Garland for attending. In your opening statement, you said that you work to uphold civil rights. Is the Sixth Amendment one of those in the Bill of Rights?
The Sixth Amendment is one.
It is, great.
Certainly a civil right.
And you work to uphold civil rights for all Americans, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. When the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution says the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury, what kind of a time frame does a speedy trial mean?
Well, there's two different ones. So there's the Speedy Trial Act.
That's correct.
I used to be able to tell you exactly how long it took, but I believe at least the first part I remember is 30 days from the complaint.
That's correct.
I think it's 120 days after that, and then there are exceptions for different motions for a speedy trial.
Okay, I believe it says 70 days from the filing of charges of the defendant's appearance
It's been a
before the
long time
judicial
since
officer.
I actually appeared in magistrate's court to make that argument.
Okay, great. I'm glad you are well aware of that. Mark Houck was arrested September 23rd, 2022, and found not guilty on January 30th, 2023. The jury deliberated about an hour. DOJ accused Houck of twice assaulting the volunteer in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic and charged him with 2 counts of violating the FISA Act, freedom of access to clinic entrances. The arrest to the trial took just over 4 months. Would you consider that a speedy trial?
Yes.
All right, so would I. Last week, I visited the D.C. Department of Corrections and met with some of the 20 prisoners who were arrested in connection to the events at the Capitol on January the 6th. According to a Just Security article that came out on March the 20th, 11 of the 20 have not accepted a plea deal, nor have they even been brought to trial. Today is March the 29th, 2023. Attorney General Garland, is it correct that since their arrest, some of these individuals have been waiting approximately 2 years for their trial?
Look, I don't know the specifics of individual cases. The beauty of the Sixth Amendment is that each of those people is entitled to a lawyer, has a lawyer who can make a speedy trial argument in the court. Oftentimes, lawyers ask for more time. Oftentimes, they ask for exceptions for discovery. There was an enormous amount of discovery in those cases, but I don't know anything about particular cases.
Does waiting 2 years for a trial meet the speedy trial clause of the Sixth Amendment?
It can if the exceptions to the Speedy Trial Act are met. Those are the responsibility of the lawyers for those defendants to bring to the
Well, I would like you to look into that, because to me, I don't think waiting 2 years for your trial complies with the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution.
This is an argument to be made before the judge. The judge has the authority to dismiss a case for a violation of the Speedy Trial
You're
Act.
absolutely correct. A judge does have that authority. You know, like you said in your opening statement, you work to uphold the civil rights of all Americans. I think in this case, their civil rights are being violated, and I would appreciate you looking into that. In your opinion, should unauthorized agencies or unauthorized programs in the federal government receive funding through the Appropriations Committee, through this committee?
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question. If it hasn't been authorized,
Correct. In your opinion, should unauthorized agencies or unauthorized programs in the federal government receive funding through this Appropriations Committee?
at a high level of generality, it seems like a syllogism. If it's unauthorized, it shouldn't have appropriations.
I agree. We have authorizing committees and we have appropriating committees here in Congress. Before a government agency or program can come into existence, it must be authorized. Then we as appropriators add the money to make the program function. So I agree with you that if a program is not authorized, it should not be appropriated. Is the Department of Justice currently authorized for appropriations?
Okay, now you got me here. I'm no expert at the difference between authorizations and appropriations in specific programs.
Well, we have authorizing committees, and the authorizing committee for the Department of Justice would be the Judiciary Committee.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, right here, Public Law 109-162, the last time the Department of Justice was authorized was 2009. 2009, when your budget was $26.2 billion. So you're asking for an appropriation of $40 billion, and the department does not have an authorization. I think that's a problem.
Well, I think you got me in a certain way, but that means that during the entire previous Trump administration and much of the Bush administration, the Justice Department was also unauthorized.
Well, that would be the Obama administration.
Well, if it's since 2009, it would also include the
Well, through 2009, right here.
from 2009 to today, then all the previous administrations were also unauthorized.
That's correct, and it's incumbent upon the Department of Justice to ask for an authorization.
I have to, when I don't know the answer, I think the truthful thing for me to say is I don't know the answer, and I don't know the answer.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm finding it difficult to approve an appropriation to an agency that has not requested an authorization. And how can I, in good conscience, appropriate taxpayers' money to an unauthorized agency? So, giving you the benefit of the doubt, and the last time that you were authorized, which was 2009, I would think that $26.2 billion is probably the
Time of the
most we can
gentleman has
offer.
expired.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Mr. Trillin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cartwright and Attorney General Garland. Thank you very much for appearing here today. As co-chair of the bipartisan Second Chance Task Force, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Bureau of Prisons and recovery outcomes. The data, it's clear that the best way to reduce recidivism is through stable employment. In fact, the probability of reconviction of someone that's earning at least $10 an hour for 2 months is 8% is the recidivism number for that individual, versus the probability of the unemployed ex-offender is 60%. So justice impacted individuals are prevented from realizing their potential for a number of reasons, including lack of job training. The Bureau of Prison faces severe staffing shortages. The BOP is staffed at 86%. They're funded at 93%. which leads to augmentation, whereas educators, medical professionals, the key people, are forced to work as correctional officers. If they were a business, it would definitely fail. But this not only creates an unsafe prison conditions for the staff and for the inmates, but also affects their ability to program reentry and the ability of the inmates to access literacy classes, job training, substance use disorder, mental health treatment, etc. To make matters worse, extremists would like to drastically cut back to FY22 funding. These budget cuts will harm law enforcement. Could you talk about how decreasing funding to 22 levels will impact the safety of our correctional staff and also the inmates?
Yes, it would be devastating to the Bureau of Prisons, as it would be to all of the components at the Justice Department. It would make the staff less safe for themselves. It would make the prisons less safe for the prisoners. It would devastate our reentry programs and our anti-recidivism programs. BOP estimates that the consequence would be a complete hiring freeze and a furlough of more than 33,600 employees for 60 days. It would require the augmentation problem, which you're referring to, which means having non-correctional officers at work on correctional responsibilities. It would augment the non-custodial staff almost 100% of work hours. And the facilities would really only be able to address emergency requirements, so the First Step Act requirements would not be able to be met.
So meeting the First Step Act would be an impossibility.
Yes.
BOP is also the largest mental health and substance use provider in the country. 159,000 people incarcerated, 2/3 suffer serious mental health, 25% have substance use disorder. If the BOP funding levels are decreased to FY22, how will that affect the Bureau's ability to provide mental health treatment and MAT to inmates?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific breakdown with respect to MAT, but it is of course correct that we've asked for $409.45 million in order to cover all the First Step Act programs, including the medicated assisted treatment. And a 22% cut would mean we would get none of this. This is just an extrapolation, but I assume this means that we would not be able to provide MAT.
Exactly. Would you agree that one of the leading causes of recidivism and making our country less safe is the lack of mental health and substance use disorder treatment in our prisons?
It's certainly one of the you've put your finger on an important problem, which is that recidivism is a problem with respect to violent crime in the country. The purpose of the First Step Act, which was a bipartisan action by the Congress, is to try to reduce recidivism. And there are a number of ways in which it can be reduced, including all the things you've mentioned, including in particular vocational training, but obviously also medically assisted training. If people come out of the prisons still addicted or with a need to get drugs, they're highly likely to recidivate.
Just quickly, solitary confinement. We introduced a bill last year to reform solitary confinement. President Biden has stepped up on this and issued an executive order to reduce restrictive housing. Yet, unfortunately, the percentage of BOP inmates has gone up. What steps is DOJ and BOP taking to implement the President's executive order?
So there are three different kinds of restrictive housing. There is special management units, there's the administrative maximum units, so-called supermax, and then there's the special housing units. So both of the first two, which are the most severe restrictions, are down since 2016. The special management unit is down 56% population since 2016. The administrative max, or ADX population, has decreased 17%. Unfortunately, the special housing unit populations have increased. It's not exactly clear, but it looks like a significant part of this is COVID. The difficulty of moving people in and out between different places and individuals waiting in the special housing units for transfer to designated facilities. The new director of the Bureau of Prisons, who I appointed, has taken this on as a personal responsibility on her part to get these numbers of people in the remaining restricted housing units down.
Thank you. I yield back, and she's doing a wonderful job.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Elzey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. It's good to be here. We've not met before, but as soon as I shook your hand, I understand that you have some pretty thick skin because you get run through the ringer up here, and I appreciate your time and in coming up here. I'll get right to it. Are you familiar with the term, now, Congressman Garcia, Congressman Gonzalez, and I are all in naval aviation in our previous careers. Have you ever heard the terms alligator's closest canoe?
Yeah, I think I've heard it, the nearest bear to the door, but
That's it?
pretty
All
much
right.
the same, I think.
And have you heard the term stump the chump?
No, afraid of not.
Okay. That means when you ask a question that you're not going to get the right answer on or something like it's something to put somebody on the spot. I promise you I'm not going to play that game with
I
you
appreciate
today.
it.
But we are going to talk about the alligator closest canoe. I'm from Texas 6, which is just south of Dallas. I have a 9-county district, which has gotten pretty big, largely rural, not a whole lot of money in the district. And as I look at the budget requests for some of these programs, and I understand you have a very large department. You have a lot of folks working for you, and I know you didn't write this budget request yourself. And then you have to be under the microscope to answer for it. So I'm going to ask you a couple hard questions, namely about the SCAP program, which helps offset the cost of local law enforcement for holding within their jails illegal aliens who are criminals, either have been convicted of a felony or 2 misdemeanors. And previous to that, we had $234 million allocated to that program. That program's been cut. And I'm curious to know if there's an alligator closest canoe, which is, again, I said I'm not going to play stump the chump. We have a illegal immigration problem. We have a drug problem coming from the border. We have a human trafficking problem coming from the border. I think we can agree with that. So I asked my local sheriffs how much it costs them to hold some of these folks. So I've got 9 counties, but I talked to Sheriff Elmer Tanner of Navarre County, Brad Norman of Ellis County, my home county, Bill Wayburn of Tarrant County. We're still waiting on some of those numbers. There's 254 counties in Texas, and I would argue that Texas is bearing the brunt of what's going on the border. So I heard back from Elmer in Navarre County. He has held 28 of these criminals for a total of 2,067 days. At $69 a day, that's $142,000 cost to Navarre County and the taxpayers of Tarrant County. There's only 52,000 people there. That's real money for counties like mine in my district, like mine. So my question is, if we're going to do away with $234 million program under the justification of more emergent problems like new grant problems like the Accelerating Justice System Reform, which is $300 million discretionary over 10 years, incentivize jurisdictions in undertaking the critical work of addressing the entrenched issues of inequity and disparity, that's not the alligator closest canoe. Who on earth decided to cut that entire program that's going to offset my sheriffs from having to house illegal immigrant criminals for that program? And that's just one of many, but I don't have that much time to go over all of it. So I'd like to see why you can justify cutting that money, justify the request for the other money, and would you be willing to reinstate the SCAP program?
So I think you correctly analyzed my problem here, which is my microscope was not focused on SCAP. And I don't know the answer to your question, but I'd be happy to look at it again or for myself for the first time and have our staff talk to yours about the SCAP program and whether there was an alternative source of funding or some other arrangement was made. I just honestly don't know. And my experience before this and other committees is it's best if I say I don't know when I don't know.
Well, that is an acceptable answer. We learned that at the Naval Academy too. That is a perfectly acceptable one. I'd love it for you to look into it because it's important to a district like mine that's not made of money, and we're doing the federal government's job. We do have a problem on the border, and my sheriffs in my district are saying, where's the money coming from? And we've just cut all of it. And they were already only getting 31 cents on the dollar to house these illegal immigrant criminals. And that affects my district very, very harshly. So my time's expired. I yield back. Thank you very much for the answer.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here. You know, when Uvalde happened nearly 10 months ago in my district, the first elected official to call me was you. And I'll be honest, I didn't have you on my bingo card as being the first call, and I want to thank you for that. And you said something then. You said anything I needed, you would help provide for as we were getting through Uvalde. And you know what? You kept to your word, and I appreciate that. I want to bring something up. I'm very concerned about, and look, I've done my part. I was one of 14 Republicans that helped pass the Safer Community Act. This is a bill that is going to provide more money in mental health in our nation's history. On this Appropriations Committee, you know, I helped pass the appropriations to get through some of your funding. Now, one of the concerns I have is with the COPS and the Stop School Violence grants, okay? Some deep concerns with that. And what I've done is a lot of my communities, we're still healing from Uvalde. A lot of my communities are very concerned with their children's safety. Hell, I'm concerned with my children's school safety. And so one of the things that I represent 119 cities and towns in my district. And I've gone to every one of these little towns and I said, you need to put in for COPS grants and Stop School Violence grants. They don't have any grant writers, they don't have any resources, and they've been putting it in. And guess what? They've been denied time and time again. And I'll give you specifics. City of Divine, denied. City of Marfa, denied. Bexar County, denied. Medina County, denied. City of Castroville, denied. El Paso County, denied. These are things that I put letters of support behind, and they've been denied. I had, in Marfa, they have 4 police officers in that town. If this grant, if the COPS grant, if they would have gotten this COPS grant, they would have gone from 4 to 5 police officers. You know how excited they were? They were going, Tony, we get another police officer, we can do all these different things. They stayed up, I kid you not, they stayed up until 11 o'clock the day before it was due, because I'm pushing them. They submit it and then they get denied. I flagged this for you because in your budget request, you have a reduction, your department has a reduction, a cut in COPS and schools and Stop School Violence grants. It boggles my mind on the discretionary spending for that. It boggles my mind. We just saw what happened in Nashville a couple days ago. Seems like every week there's something that's happening from a school, schools under siege here. I need your help. I'm absolutely doing my part. I need your help. Would love to hear your thoughts on what we can do to get these COPS grants and get these Stop School Violence grants over the finish line.
Okay, so this is a big, you've identified something that I don't know about these specific sheriffs, and I would like my staff to meet with yours to go over these particular grant applications so we can figure out what the problem was there. We put a lot of money into, and we have it in part of our request now, helping rural sheriffs make the applications, particularly small sheriff's offices, small law enforcement offices, as you've described, sometimes have difficulty. It's not just filling out the paperwork, it's doing the computer work and everything. We've recognized that, and we had a program to make that easier under our OJP grants. Obviously hasn't succeeded here. I do want to say that we are asking, with respect to funding for state and local police, we're asking for more than $4.5 billion this year in both discretionary and 5-year funds. For the COPS hiring program, we're asking for an increase of $2.4 billion this year, not a decrease, an increase, a $213 million increase in the yearly funds and a $2.2 billion in a multi-year funding. The STOPS grants come under the Office of Violence Against Women Act, and they're also increased. It may be that there are 2 parts of these. There's a new gun crime prevention strategic fund, which is an increase of $884 million or $4.4 billion over 5 years. It will provide some of the funding that used to be in some of the other programs, and that includes hiring, recruitment, retention, training of officers. I think, so we're in no way reducing the amount, we're increasing it Your offices may still be having the kind of problems that we've discussed, and I'm going to ask my team to talk to yours about it.
I'd appreciate that because this is an important topic that's not going away anytime soon. And what I'm starting to see is people are giving up in the federal government. They're going, why even submit it, Tony? It's a waste of my time. The need is absolutely there, especially in these small communities. We'll work our guts out in our office to help identify these people, vet them to make sure that you're getting good products. I wouldn't put a letter of support behind any of these projects if I didn't do the due diligence on my end, but I need your help. You have a partner up here to get things over the finish line, but I need your help. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Time has expired. That concludes the first round of questions. I believe we probably have a few members who would want to be part of a second round. But so we will do that, but we will take a 5-minute recess.
If I could,
Committee stands in
Mr.
recess.
Chairman, if I could have an indulgence for just one moment with respect to my answer to Mr. Klein.
Yes.
I've taken a look at that FBI response to the subpoena. There actually was a full field investigation. I don't know any of the details about it, but there was. And if you take a look at the letter, I think I said there were none, but it turns out there was one.
Committee stands in recess for 5 minutes.